Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Dogman, growl. Dogman, bark. Dogman, snarl. Bigfoot. He a squatch, just you watch. It no sin, be scared of him. Bigfoot, he fighting Dogman. I am running in the fog, man. Bigfoot, he losing ground. Dogman running him out of town.
The name of this channel is Scary Stories, and I've got a really scary one right now about two YouTubers and two cryptids. And this allegedly true but admittedly unproven narrative is entitled Bigfoot Dogman Punch-Out in the Midwest. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am a former Scary Stories teller on YouTube who never told any Dogman stories, but I did once see a Dogman in real life. In fact, I saw it fighting a Bigfoot. It's a long story. I'll try to speed through the human parts fast to get to the monster parts sooner. So, my brief career on YouTube consisted of me starting a channel, writing my own scary stories, uploading them, then getting attacked and lied about by certain other channels I won't mention, until I eventually gave up and realized I would never be allowed a fair shake. Also, I didn't start doing this to get into fights and arguments. In school, I had always been in the advanced classes with the nerds. I never knew what bullying was until I tried to start telling scary stories on the internet. I mean, let's not blame YouTube because people aren't nice anywhere on the web. I figured out how to make a living as a writer without having to read my writing out loud on YouTube anymore. And that works better for me personally, since I really don't benefit in any way from constantly having to defend myself from my competitors pretending to be average viewers while writing from their fake accounts. I don't know how you lasted as long as you have, since you seem to be as sensitive as me. But the one good thing that YouTube channel led to was that I got to see the only two cryptids that I've ever seen in real life. Another scary channel who was at that time starting out, same as I was, decided to pick on me in various places online, and to encourage his friends to pick on me as well. It turned out that we both live in the same state, and it led to the point where we agreed to meet offline and alone to have it out in person. We drove to the intersection of two rural roads I will not name, and we got out of our cars to have our little discussion. Well, I know what YouTube can be like, so I won't get into specifics, but there were fisticuffs to be certain. Two little short nerds trying to maim each other. It started off with me filming him and him filming me, both on our cell phones. The air that afternoon was literally charged with electricity, with the sky dark and lightning crashing all around, warning of an impending storm that I don't think ever came. Almost as soon as we started filming and arguing, he knocked my phone way out of my hand and out into the woods somewhere. That got me so angry that I ripped his phone out of his hands and practically stomped it into sand under my boot heel. I am not really a strong or athletic guy, but I was so sick of being lied about and smeared by this jerk that I had the fists of fury in that insane moment. I think I was as surprised by my behavior as the evil nerd I was fighting. So anyway, that was when it happened. The moment that this guy and I had both been waiting for our entire YouTube careers came crashing out of the woods in front of us, and neither of us had a cell phone to record it on. You know how they say that some Bigfoot can have glowing red eyes? Well, it seems that most dogmen reported to have glowing amber eyes. Well, out of the woods that dark, overcast afternoon spilled a big, black-furred Sasquatch with white eyeshine, tinged with amber and orange. And right on the big heels of his big feet was a large dogman with bright red eyes filled with sheer anger. He seemed to have suffered the worst effects of the fight before it arrived where we were, as he seemed to either have a bloody nose or maybe a cut lip or something. Both creatures stood upright like humans, although the dogman had legs like a hound dog's rear legs on him. The Squatch was so dark that it nearly looked like a shadow figure moving in front of the tree line. But the dogman was clearly covered in brown fur, visible even in that dim lighting. The Bigfoot had the expected pointed cranium, and the dogman had a wolf-like head with pointed dog ears on top. I do have to say, though, that the dogman was the far more agitated of the two. He seemed extraordinarily infuriated, while the Bigfoot seemed to be more interested in escape than in continuing the fight. I don't know what the argument started over, but I would assume it would be hard for two large predator species to exist at the same time in the place where this happened. It was in the middle of the country, and it was not too far from some wilderness land, I suppose, but it wasn't that close to it either. I would call the place rural, but not natural. We probably could have driven to someone's home in under a minute, and there's a city maybe a half hour away, tops. There are already bear in that area, and some people say cougars are here too, although I don't know if they're supposed to be officially. I saw a pack of wild dogs not too far from there one time pretty soon before this, and then I was seeing these two really big predators going at it. Now, I don't know if there's enough food for that many meat eaters unless they can survive by eating the leftovers thrown out by humans. I mean, maybe scavenging answers a few questions at once, if there are sources for food for the monsters left out by us ourselves. It might answer what these two were fighting over in the first place. As it was, I remember turning to look at the other YouTuber I had just been fighting with, and he looked at me. We were both clearly wondering if this was a setup that the other one had created. The thing is, those cryptids were heavyweights. They were larger than men. Those were not costumes because no person would be large enough to wear those skins as costumes. Those were genuine cryptids. He couldn't record it because I had stomped on his phone. That meant that if I could find my phone, then I would be the only one with a recording. I tore off into the brush to look for where the idiot had caused the device to land. We're talking a seriously overgrown intersection of bushes and trees and vines that I was tearing up and tearing through to find my Samsung and see if its Sam still sang or sung. Meanwhile, the greatest ape, Bigfoot, was pummeling the dogman with punches, but they were these punches that weren't like human punches. It was like he smacked the dogman, but with a closed fist, if that makes any sense. In most of the stories I've since read and heard about these two kinds of cryptids battling, the dogman is said to lead with his teeth and claws. But most of the fighting I was witness to involved him clobbering the Sasquatch back with closed fist punches. This was not what I was expecting from a dogman attack, so maybe I was seeing a werewolf. If so, it was a very large werewolf. As I mentioned earlier, both creatures were much bigger than men, taller than 7 feet, but not gangly, very well proportioned, and ridiculously steroid freak level over muscular. And I mean that for both of them. Some say they can see the muscles moving under the fur of the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot, but Patty was a body positivity model compared to these two. I don't think they had an ounce of fat on either one of them, or both combined. And maybe that might have been why their fighting was so bitter and savage. Maybe they were both extremely hungry, and fighting over the same food source. Neither of them seemed to react to me or the idiot, so I don't think that human beings were on either of their menus. Or maybe they were just too mad at each other to care about two skinny and short nerds. At some point, the moron I was arguing with got in his car and left, saying he'd be back with a film crew. Yeah, whatever. I kept searching in the brush while also keeping my eye on the two huge beastmen. I was starting to get really flustered because I couldn't afford to buy another phone. And also, because I was missing the one thing in my entire life that I wanted to record more than any other thing ever. The Bigfoot broke free of the Dogman and began to run away toward the woods on my right. The Dogman charged after him on all fours and quickly closed the gap, leaping onto the Bigfoot, with their momentum carrying them forward into a tree or two, really hard. Both of them bounced back and slammed hard into the ground, but it was the Bigfoot once again who got up first and began to at first crawl, then stand and walk away. I don't think he was capable of running yet. The fall had knocked the wind out of him. Before he could make it into the woods on either side, though, that Dogman was up and flying after him. I got the feeling that the Bigfoot was the one who started this fight, but I think he was regretting that decision long before this point. Lightning flashed in the sky, and I suddenly saw a glinting reflection of the lightning under my car. I looked more closely, and it sure looked like that might be my phone under there. I got down as low as I could, and I reached my arm under the car all the way to the shoulder. I was just about to grab the phone when the ground started vibrating so violently that my car lifted up off the ground in rhythm with the seismic stomping. I stood up quickly and looked. Both beasts were charging toward me and my vehicle, both of them at once. I suppose the Bigfoot was once again trying to escape the Dogman, but in either case, they were both going to run me and my car down in about 3 seconds. I dove down and tucked my body in tight to my car as the immense Goliath-sized Bigfoot leaped off the ground and attempted to land on the roof of my car. He overshot the landing and skidded off the edge of the car's roof, landing on the dirt about an inch from several sensitive parts of my body. My car and I both bounced in the air. The Squatch ran past the car as the Dogman landed hard on the edge of the roof, causing the 2 wheels furthest from me to lift up off the ground for a moment, then crash back down. I looked up and watched him balancing on the edge of the top of my car, looking to all the world like a fur-covered gargoyle. He nearly tilted the entire car on top of me before leaping off the edge and charging off after the Bigfoot, who had clearly offended him badly in some way. I ran around to the other side of my car and I reached down to grab my phone. It had been turned off, but I was able to turn it back on. Of course, that took several minutes, and in the meantime, the 2 cryptids were long gone. I thought about running after them into the woods, then noticed I had already gotten back into my car, and I had already put on my seatbelt and turned on the engine. The spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. It wasn't long after that I got a job at McDonald's, and when I first got paid, I realized I was doubling the amount of money I had been making from YouTube. I didn't continue trying to do the channel much longer. At McDonald's, I only get yelled at when I do something wrong. At YouTube, I was getting yelled at for just telling people stories. But in honesty, the best story I had was the one I never told, and that was the story entitled Bigfoot Dogman Punch-Out in the Midwest. Werewolf Street Rumble. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I saw a werewolf street fight when I was 14 or 15 years old, back in the late 1980s. I have been trying to remember exactly where this happened, but it's been taking me some time because I'm not in touch with the other people who were there when this all happened way back when. Like my sister, I think my sister was there, but she's not speaking to me. I know my former best friend was there, but I'm not speaking to him. The rest of the people who saw it were not people I knew, and I would guess they were residents of the town of Iron River, although they might have been visiting as I was. We saw a number of large animals, and they looked nothing like anything I'd ever seen before. Years later, I was with my kid watching some sort of comedy horror movie for kids with Jack Black in it. I forget what it was called. They had these werewolves in the supermarket in that kids film that were just like what I had seen in Iron River back then. Although the ones we saw weren't cartoons, and they were nastier than the movie versions. I guess the main reason it's taken me so long to put this together, besides the reasons I already mentioned, is that this wasn't my hometown, or even my home state, and it wasn't the hometown of the guy who had dragged me to this birthday party either. See, I had been staying for some weeks that summer with my friend we'll call Colbo, whose parents were friends with my mother. Both my parents were fighting, and Mom wanted me and my sister to hear as little of it as possible. So she sent us to stay with Colbo and his mom in Eau Claire, which is in northwestern Wisconsin. Colbo's friend was having a birthday party all the way up in Iron River, which is in northern Michigan. Or it might not have been Colbo's friend, but this was one of those teenage parties where no adults were going to be near. So word spread through the teenage grapevine, and Colbo found out about it. It was our chance to do adult stuff, so we made up some fake place we said we were going. Then we met with Colbo's friends who had borrowed someone's parents' car, and off we drove to Nomo to experience a taste of grown-up style partying. Now, the house where this happened was not the last house on the end of the block, but I remember that we were all running out to the woods nearby and acting crazy. I don't remember if there was some reason we were out of the house. I think it was just that we were new to partying, and we were all out of our heads. But, maybe a neighbor complained of the noise or something, I just can't remember. I do remember us walking out to the woods, acting like we were insane people, and having the time of our lives, celebrating the birthday of some girl we didn't know, or at least I didn't know. It was in those woods when we first noticed that we weren't alone in there, and in fact we had accidentally gotten way too close to someone else's gang fight. I don't mean other teenagers either. I don't even mean other humans. I mean a couple of gangs of these werewolf-looking creeps, these hairy mofos with dog ears up on top of their heads, even though they stood on their back legs, and they fought with paws that looked way too much like hands for my taste. Hands with these dagger-like claws at the ends of the fingers. Have you ever seen a kangaroo's front claws? Well, imagine a 5-fingered version of that, and you'll understand why the bunch of us beat it out of those woods when we saw these werewolves, or whatever you want to call them, heading in our direction. Sometimes it seemed there were 4 or 5 of the creatures. Other times it seemed like there were 7 or 8, but they ran around so fast, chasing each other into and out of the woods over and over in circles, that other times I only saw 2 or 3 of them at once. They were the fastest land animals I had ever seen, appearing almost like a blur when they moved around, trying to do damage to each other. There was a bear-like brown pack, and there was another pack that was gray to black, so they were sort of wearing their team uniforms, you might say. The brown ones looked really a lot like bears, but no bear moves like these creatures were moving. I don't just mean they were fast either. They seemed completely natural on 2 legs, and bears just don't. Their legs were too long to be bears, too. They were more like dog legs, and I remember that at least one of the brown ones had a tail like a dog. Brown bears just don't look like that. But their snouts were short, and the ears were smaller and less pointed than the black ones, so they really were bear-like canines, I guess. Or else a kind of a bear that's very much like a wolf. Well, that's not exactly right either, since these things would slap and claw at each other, with paws that were nearly hands. I've mentioned already that this party was in Iron River, but I am not absolutely certain where it happened. I do remember seeing a water tower, but it was off in the distance from where this was happening. It might have been right here on Boyington. I'm pretty certain it was on the west side of town, but this was almost 40 years ago and it was nighttime. I remember a lot of one-story homes that looked like Mr. Brady designed them, so I know it wasn't too far from here. It might have happened on West Ross Street, I'm not really sure though. Oh, there's the water tower. I never remember being that close to it, so this can't be where it happened. This might have happened on West Division Street, right over by this big patch of woods. This looks a little more like what I remember. I can see the tower from here, but it's not very close. I think this was the block. There were these creatures coming out of the woods, like real-life scary versions of Yogi and Boo Boo. It was really creepy. And these looked like monsters, not like animals. They looked real, though. When one of them knocked the other down, they raised dust. They got dirty. It wasn't like watching a cartoon. And I know I wasn't hallucinating, because I kept watching everyone else reacting to what was happening. I was just as interested in the other guys as I was with the monsters for a while. Since I was so unused to feeling tipsy, I wasn't sure what was really happening until a creature fell sideways on top of me, and I crashed hard into some thorn bushes. I remember being pulled out of the bushes by the others, but I was screaming incoherently, like a little kid. It was very embarrassing because I couldn't stop screaming and crying. There had been some girls at the party being friendly with me earlier, but that ended when I started weeping and checking myself for fleas and ticks after that dogman fell on top of me. I did not do myself proud on that night. I remember going back inside the party house and being sick for a while in the bathroom. After that, I drank some cola and started feeling a little bit more awake and aware again. Once I could stand and walk and the world didn't spin around so much, I regained interest in what was happening outside. By that point, people had started emptying out of several houses into the street, and they were gathered in 3 or 4 main groups, watching the werewolves, who by that point were engaged in a full-on rumble, like you'd see in a Roger Corman movie or something. And these creatures fought dirty, sneaking up behind each other, grabbing at very sensitive parts of each other's bodies and not letting go. You can just imagine all the shrieking. These bad boys were not going easy on each other. They were clawing and biting and scratching, and I remember seeing dozens of big wads of dog hair all over the street, blowing in all directions. They were giving each other a good grooming, if nothing else. So I do remember talking to a girl and a guy who seemed to be from around there, and I was asking them questions about these dogmen. It took me a while to figure out that they didn't know any more about this than I did. They didn't know who these creatures were or why they were fighting. I walked around asking anybody there what the animals were. What were we witnessing? I don't remember anyone having any idea what was happening, just that it was a lot more interesting to them than watching TV, which was basically your one option for entertainment in those days. I mean, we also had books, magazines, newspapers with comics in them, radio, and TV. VCRs and Betamax had gotten pretty popular by then, but I don't remember if my family even had cable yet. I mean, I guess we did. There were no cell phones, that's for sure. There was one girl I saw there who I knew had to live there because she was filming it on her camcorder. It was kind of big. She had to rest it on her shoulder as she shot. I think it was VHS. I don't mean she was shooting professional video, but she was shooting these wolfmen fighting in the dark. I doubt you could see much on that video very clearly, but I'm certain that if that videotape still exists, you would be able to see some stuff you couldn't explain away. Now, I never got to see that video myself, and I never heard from anyone else who did. So maybe she forgot to hit record or something, I don't know. Maybe that footage is still sitting in her living room on a shelf even now to this day. Maybe just feet from where I saw her shooting the video. Yeah, or maybe the tape got erased or jammed in the machine. In either case, I would love to see that video today if it does exist. So these two different packs did not fight in the same way, even though they were both canine and both about the same size roughly. The brown ones were like living battering rams, charging forward, bashing everything in their vicinity. I saw one of them drop to all fours and chase one of the dark ones straight into a tree branch, which cracked off and fell. The bear-like dogman then picked up that huge branch and proceeded to brain a series of the darker ones with his huge shillelagh. The dark ones, though, they moved in this sort of sneaky way, kind of slinky, sort of like cats. They went up on their back legs and down on all fours effortlessly, sometimes jumping onto trees sideways and running along the trunk like they were big furry Jackie Chan monsters. In the woods, it looked like shadows were coming to life, but this was just those creepy black-as-night werewolf creatures. Sometimes when they stood in shadow, the only thing you could even see about them was their eye shine, glowing this off-white color that really made them look supernatural. I mean, I don't think they were supernatural, but who knows? None of the neighbors said anything to me about having seen these in their neighborhood before, so maybe they just walked off a flying saucer that night. Maybe there was a portal in the area that only opened that one evening. Or maybe these two gangs chased each other toward Iron River from much further and deeper in the woods. I remember being amazed by the sheer strength of the brown ones, who seemed to be able to pick the dark ones up and throw them into each other, one after the next, without ever tiring. I saw them fighting alone, several black ones swarming one brown one. They had the bear-like creatures outnumbered at most points during the fighting, but this never seemed to bother the bulky monsters as they fought these living shadows. I'm glad I had already been sick in the toilet and cleared my head up by that point, so that I could understand what I was looking at least for a little while. Members of the Dark Pack used their hand-like clawed paws to climb trees quickly and drop down on their enemies from above. They were insane, like kamikaze pilots or something. They seemed to be willing to give themselves up at any moment for any reason. Their instincts for pack survival seemed to take precedent over their own personal survival instincts. But they also showed a great instinct for cooperation, continually swarming the brown bear Dogman, double teaming, triple teaming, ganging up on them but never really seeming to be able to turn the tide in this battle, which just kept waging back and forth. It must have been 2 or 3 in the morning by that point, and I had my second wind. When the fighting moved back into the woods, Colbo and I ran into those dark trees after the beasts, wanting to see more of this fight. The next thing that happened was Colbo was pulling me back very hard. I found this annoying, and resisted what he was doing. And then, a tree crashed down in front of me, coming from my right, going down to my left, whizzing past me so close that it gave me a rub burn on the tip of my nose. A few inches further forward, it would have crushed my brain into my feet. But that red, painful burn on the end of my nose was enough to remind me for about a week that I am a careless idiot. Colbo saw one of the brown ones slam into that tree and deliberately knock it over. It looked like the monster was trying to nail one of the darker wolfmen, but he was going to take me out instead. At least if Colbo hadn't saved me in spite of myself. At some point when we were under the tree cover, we saw the creatures change tactics, and the tide of the battle turned. Rather than continuing to fight as individuals, the bear-like creatures began to employ their own type of teamwork. They formed a defensive wall, blocking the dark, slinky ones from moving any further or deeper into those woods. Then, slowly, the brown wall of doom began marching forward, back toward town, toward where Colbo and I were watching this all playing out. When the dark beastmen started fleeing in our direction, Colbo and I gave up our hiding spot and began to try our best to get back to the house before the dark black Dogman did. I remember racing as fast as I still had energy to run by that late point in the night, trying to get back to the party house. I could tell which one that was because there were cars parked all over the lawn. It became apparent that we were about to be overrun by the werewolf creatures, and we were not going to make it inside. Suddenly Colbo grabbed me and pulled me again. This time I went with it, and ended up banging my head really hard against the top of this car door that my friend was dragging me through. Once I was inside, grabbing my head and moaning, Colbo reached past me and pulled the door shut, locking it. Then, bam, we were hit with a tidal wave of the dark black Dogmen, who swarmed above the car, banging into the vehicle with their feet as they ran over the roof, the hood, the trunk. We bounced up and down and sideways, and then the creatures had passed us. We looked in the direction they had come from, and we saw the brown wave of death moving toward us. The black dogman had leaped over us in an almost feline fashion. It was clear from the dust that the brown ones were raising that they were going to run over us much more in the fashion of elephants than kitty cats. I accepted that my time on this planet was about to come to an end. I prepared to meet my maker, and I remember saying, "Sorry, Mom," as though she could hear me. I knew it was over, and I felt a sense of gratitude strangely. At least I had gotten to party like an adult one time before the end came. But then, a loud siren shocked me so much that I bounced in my seat and banged my head on the roof all over again. It was the police. I don't think their presence had anything to do with the Dogman rumble either. I think it had something more to do with the cars parked all over this lawn and the loud music still blasting from the house itself. Before I knew what was happening, Colbo had the engine of that car started, and we were speeding away from the scene, heading west, with several of both types of dogmen chasing after us. I thought that Colbo had hot-wired the engine, but the keys were in the ignition. He had merely started the car up. I was looking out the window and watching the werewolves dispersed, worried that we were going to get arrested as car thieves. I asked him where the heck he was driving us. He said, "Home," as though driving a stolen car to your home made any sense at all to do. But that's what he did. He drove us home, parked it across the street from his parents' house, and then we went inside. He made a phone call to someone, I don't know who, but apparently it was a call to the owner of that car. So at least he knew whose car we just took our joyride home in. As I listened, Colbo spun a web of lies, each one more drastic than the previous one. According to this new version of reality, Colbo's dad had come to the party, picked us up and drove us home. So why was Colbo calling? Well, once we got home, you see, we saw the strangest sight we'd ever seen. Yes, this person he was calling, their car was parked right across the street from his home. Yeah, what are the chances, right? And the car keys seemed to still be in the ignition. So strange, huh? So then he hung up, we had a big laugh, and then we crashed out for most of the next day. I never saw any kind of monster ever again, except for my ex-wife and her lawyer, of course. But at least I got to see the werewolf street rumbles. Werewolves fight over food, aka the Great Burger Battle of 1982. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I got a couple of stories you might find interesting that are spaced years apart. The first one sometimes makes people laugh when I tell it, but it wasn't funny when it happened. The second one couldn't have really happened without the first one, and both involve werewolves or dogmen or, well, you decide yourself. This first one is one of those stories that are going to get people leaving rude comments about how it couldn't possibly be true. It's not really that strange a concept, animals fighting over food, but because of the location this happened to me in, people sometimes laugh and scoff. I've told this story about 100 times, and I swear about 85 or 90 of those times, some smart mouth tells me I'm making up the story to get attention. Either that or they say there must have been psychoactive mushrooms in those burgers I was eating that night. I'm hoping you do a good job with this first story so I never have to tell it again. If someone asked to hear my Dogman versus Dogman story, I'd be able to just give them the link to your video. So this was 1982. It was not a good year for me, but it was better than this year. I used to be able to afford to eat at Burger King in those days, so that was definitely a plus. The downside for me and my friends about 1982 this one night was that the parking lot of our local Burger King was full of burger-stealing vermin. The large kind. As in Dogman large. We had just started eating our burgers, and we were standing outside my friend's car in the parking lot, chatting and enjoying the cool night air, when we heard a low growl coming from the shadows. At first we thought it was just some stray dogs rummaging through the garbage bins, but as the growls grew louder and more menacing, we knew something was off. Out of the darkness emerged two massive figures, their fur bristling under the dim streetlights. They stood on their hind legs, towering over us with glowing eyes fixated on the bags of leftovers by our feet. These were no ordinary dogs. These were dogmen, ancient creatures of folklore that were said to roam the Midwestern woods in search of food. My friends and I stood frozen in fear as the dogmen approached, their large claws clicking on the pavement. Without warning, they lunged toward us, teeth bared, and snarling ferociously. In a panic, we scrambled to the other side of the car to put something between us and those monsters. As we stood frozen in disbelief, one of the dogmen grabbed some of the food, and then the other one tried to grab it from him. The food went flying all over the parking lot, and the two massive dogmen circled that food and each other, growling low and deep. The scent of grease and charred meat hung heavy in the air, mixing with the musky odors of sweat and fur. Their eyes locked in a primal challenge, sparks of intelligence shining through the beastly facade. I could see the tension in their sinewy muscles, coiled, ready to spring into action at any moment. The night was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the cool autumn breeze. My friends and I dared not move, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves and risk becoming dessert to their dinner. One of the dogmen tried to bite the other, jaws snapping shut just inches from the other's throat. A guttural snarl erupted from deep within its chest as it twisted away from the lethal strike. The second dogman retaliated with a swipe of its claws, barely missing its opponent's flank. Their movements were a blur of fur and fangs, each one trying to gain the upper hand in this brutal skirmish over French fries and a Whopper. I could feel the primal energy emanating from them, a raw power that made my heart race with a mix of terror and awe. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as the two dogmen continued their vicious dance, neither willing to back down from the other. Suddenly a loud crash echoed through the empty parking lot, causing both creatures to pause for a fleeting moment. We turned our heads to see the source of the noise, and we saw a third dogman emerge from the shadows, far larger and more imposing than the first two. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity as it assessed the situation before joining the fray. Well, not only did that huge 15-foot-tall monster dogman scare the two smaller ones away, but he scared us back into the car and out of that lot. Werewolves were the main topic among me and my friends for the rest of that summer. For Christmas that year, one of my uncles bought me a book called The Book of the Werewolves, which dates all the way back to the 1800s. At first I was excited to have it, but it's filled with words like thither and yon, and I was sort of lazy-minded in those days. I did like werewolves, but not enough to read a book from 1865 about them, apparently. Also, I kinda just didn't believe in werewolves. I thought that what we had seen were animals of some kind that science hadn't cataloged yet. I didn't think they were Lon Chaney Jr., you know? Fast forward about 34 years, and now I'm a father with a 19-year-old daughter who is taking a year off to, quote, find herself, unquote, before either going to college or entering the workforce. Now, what year did this happen in again? I think 2003 or 2004. So in those days, my wife and I had a room full of bookshelves where we both had all our books we had bought or been given in our lives. And it was actually a nice place for the family to gather as the kids were growing up. It felt like a library room in a mansion because we found nice old antique bookcases and comfortable antique furniture for the room. We didn't have any fireplaces in that house, but on Christmas we'd watch the Yule log burn on TV in that room, and it was very cozy. So when I went into that library one day, and I found my 19-year-old girl with her head in that old Book of the Werewolves that my uncle had given me over 30 years prior, I did not get a cozy feeling. In fact, a shiver ran through me. I don't know why, but I immediately knew this was not a good development. Now, I had only skimmed the book in my time, to be honest, but my daughter, let's just call her Jane. Jane was already more than halfway through that thing. It's hard to explain why, but when I found 19-year-old Jane in our family library reading my old copy of the Book of the Werewolves by Sabine Baring Gould, I felt incredibly uneasy and I knew something was wrong. The book itself was written by a religious Christian priest and is not evil. Obviously, neither is my daughter, so I wondered what brought about my feeling of unease. It would take some time to discover that my dread was well-founded, and my intuition was very on target. I wouldn't come to understand for some time, but my lovely daughter, who we're calling Jane, had already started to become a werewolf. Jane was so engrossed in the book that she didn't notice me entering the room. Her eyes were fixated on the pages, her expression a mix of fascination and apprehension. As I approached her, she finally looked up, a sheepish smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Dad, I know this seems strange," she began, her voice hesitant, "but there's something about this book. It's like it's speaking to me in a way I can't explain." I studied her face, searching for any signs of mischief or deceit, but all I found was sincerity and a hint of fear lurking in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, I sat down next to my daughter and I gently took her hand. "Jane, whatever is happening to you, I'm willing to face it together with you." Little did I know that our lives were about to change in ways that we could never have imagined. Now, as I've already detailed here earlier, I had seen multiple Dogmen in that one incident in 1982, but I did not actually believe in werewolves. So I wasn't sure what I felt uneasy about, but I was certain it wasn't a fear of my daughter becoming something that I didn't even believe in. Jane started hanging out with a very singular set of boys. Men, I should call them. Their beards were thicker than I could grow mine. I referred to them as the Unibrow Gang, but Jane did not find that joke very funny. Jane's behavior over the next few months began to change in drastic ways after she fell under the spell of these bearded young unibrow men. They seemed to have an unspoken hold over her. Jane's once vibrant personality dimmed, overshadowed by a newfound intensity in her gaze, at least whenever she was with them. I watched from a distance, unable to shake off the unsettling feeling that gripped me. One fateful night, as the full moon beamed down with an almost palpable intensity, I followed Jane deep into the woods where the Unibrow Gang had led her. Hidden among the trees, I witnessed a scene that chilled me to the core. The men began to chant, in a language that I did not recognize, their voices rising in eerie harmony, as Jane stood in the center of them, her eyes gleaming with a kind of electric insanity. Before my disbelieving eyes, Jane's form began to shift and contort, her bones apparently cracking and reshaping beneath her skin. She didn't change all at once. It was a very gradual thing. I wondered as I watched if I was being hypnotized, but I was hiding in the bushes. I knew I couldn't be mesmerized. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I told myself that whatever this is, it must be really happening. One of the most confusing parts of the transformation was that it would happen and unhappen and then happen again. I saw my daughter's lovely nose become a dog nose, but when I focused on her face, I could still somehow see her human nose as well. And then I saw both at once, her dog nose and her human nose, but at the same time. Sounds like a hallucination, right? I thought so too, but I could hear my daughter's groans of unhappiness and discomfort as this process continued, and the men chanted and sang in monotone. I could spend all day telling you about the unnatural amber light that began to glow from my poor daughter's eyes. They were normally a lovely brown color, but now shone with an otherworldly glow that human eyes simply can't have. It was as if a piece of the moon had been captured within her gaze, casting an eerie light upon the surrounding trees. The Unibrow Gang seemed unfazed by this transformation, their chanting growing louder and more urgent as Jane's body continued to shift between human and beast. Unable to tear my eyes away, I watched in horror as fur sprouted from her skin, her limbs elongating into a more animal form. The men's voices reached a fever pitch, their faces contorted with a mix of reverence and hunger as they beheld the spectacle before them. The unnatural amber light that emanated from Jane's eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness of the woods, casting an eerie glow all around her. The chants of the unibrow guys grew louder and more urgent, filling the night air with a sense of foreboding. Torn between the instinct to rush forward and protect my daughter and the overwhelming fear that gripped me. As Jane's transformation continued, her body elongated and twisted in ways that defied all logic. Fur sprouted from her skin, covering her in a dark coat that glistened under the moonlight. A snarl escaped her lips, no longer human, but a guttural sound like an animal might make. In a frightening convulsion, Jane grew a snout on her face, so that she began to look more like a demon from hell than the angel that her mother and I had raised. Slowly, incrementally, she was becoming a werewolf, a monster, and I could do nothing but watch. Let me describe in detail what it feels like to see this happening to your beloved daughter. The pain that tore through my heart as I witnessed my daughter's transformation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was a mixture of disbelief, horror, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The very essence of who Jane was seemed to be slipping away, being replaced by a creature I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to come to terms with the impossible reality that was unfolding before me. My daughter turned to the side, and for the first time, my eyes beheld the profile of a hellhound, a werewolf, and it was the face of my own daughter. She looked like she was changing species, like she was becoming one of those animals I had seen fighting with each other over a Whopper and getting burger sauce all over their fur. She had become something less than human. She was giving up all the gifts that God bestows upon us. And now I was watching her devolve into some kind of a furry beast woman. I sobbed, but as quietly as I could. If those young men discovered me in those bushes, I couldn't be sure they wouldn't end both me and my daughter. Instead, I was forced to sit still and watch the next phase in my daughter Jane's painfully slow transformation into a female werewolf. As Jane's transformation progressed, her limbs elongated and her fingers morphed into long clawed appendages. Her once lustrous hair turned coarse and bristly, matching the dark fur that now covered her body in a sinister shroud. The unibrow gang's chanting reached a fever pitch, each syllable vibrating through the air, like a curse, binding my daughter to this monstrous fate. I wanted to scream, to run to her and hold her close, but I knew deep down that the Jane I had raised was no longer there. In her place stood a creature of nightmares, a being torn between human emotion and primal instinct. Her body bulked up, muscles shifting beneath her fur-covered skin. Her human features faded further into the background, replaced by the primal essence of the werewolf she was becoming. The unibrow gang's chants reached a crescendo, their voices rising in an otherworldly chorus, filling the dense forest. As the last echoes of the chanting faded into the night, a deafening silence fell over the clearing. The unibrow guys watched with a mixture of awe and reverence as Jane, now fully transformed into a werewolf, let out a bone-chilling howl that pierced the stillness of the night. Her amber eyes, once filled with human warmth and emotion, now gleamed with a feral intensity that betrayed the predatory instincts lurking within. The moonlight bathed her in an ethereal glow, casting long shadows that danced around her towering form. With each heaving breath, I could see the struggle within her, between the remnants of Jane that lingered somewhere deep inside, and the primal urges of the beast, which was now in control. The bearded boys fell to their knees in supplication, their faces contorted in a mix of fear and adoration. They had summoned this nightmare from the depths of the underworld, a creature of darkness and chaos, and now they were at its mercy. As for me, I hid, frozen in shock, my heart pounding in my chest as I witnessed the unthinkable. My daughter, once a loving and caring individual, was now a creature of the night, a predator among us. The full moon continued to cast its haunting glow upon the scene before me, as if whispering its approval of the terrible transformation which I had witnessed taking place. The air was thick with the scent of fear and desperation, and it hung heavy in that forest. I didn't know what to do or how to react, my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. In the distance I heard the howls of other werewolves, a sound that echoed through the woods endlessly. I wanted to run into that clearing and save my daughter, but I would be trying to save her from her own decisions. And that isn't really something a parent can do. Not once your child is an adult, anyway. It's been almost 10 years since that night. My daughter is still pursuing this path in her life, and we've grown more and more distant. Honestly, I hate to say it, but I'm scared of her. She frightens me. She tells me that she would never hurt me or her mother, but hasn't she already? It's hard for either one of us to put our feelings into words since our daughter chose to become a werewolf. And so what started as a cryptid sighting of multiple dogmen ends with me realizing that my own daughter chose to become one of those animals. What kind of upbringing did we give her? All I know is we love her brothers and their families 10 times as much, now that we know what it's like to lose someone that you thought would always be there. I used to think of cryptids and werewolves as a fun hobby. It's gotten way too personal lately though, and so I felt compelled to write you this email. I hope you use it, and if you do, thank you for giving me this platform to get this off my chest. I knocked down a dogman at the age of 60. Dear Scary Stories NYC. First of all, I want to clear that I was the one who was 60, not the dogman. I think that title is a little confusing, so feel free to change it if you wanna. I was first turned onto your channel by another one of my friends who was also, like me, active in the underground fight club scene in the late 20th century through to about 2005, I guess. When I was 60, I was still fighting, and on 3 different occasions, I got my behind handed to me by the fighting dogmen that you talked about on a couple of your shows already. The walking kangaroos, or whatever they call them. I never heard that term myself, but I can't imagine them being called that. I boxed a kangaroo once also, but he wasn't anywhere near as tough to fight as the dogmen. Any of the dogmen. There were 3 fighting in the Midwest that I knew of in that era. 2 earlier in my career, and 1 toward the end. Now, when you fought a dogman, you got paid a certain guaranteed amount up front, in case you got hurt, or in case your wife needed money to bury you with. It wasn't a gig you took unless you were in a bad situation and needed a big paycheck in a hurry. The 3 times I fought dogmen were the 3 lowest points in my life, and you don't want to know the details. I was willing to risk my life to get that money because if I didn't pay my debts, I would have been a dead man anyway. So when you fought a dogman, you weren't going to finish the full 10 rounds or whatever had been scheduled. You would either try to last as long as you could before getting knocked out, or you would take the fall in a specific round that you were hired to take the fall in. That was the round that the promoter was betting on you to lose in. I had a little bit of pride, and I had made these guys a lot of money when I was younger, so I was always allowed to pick my round to take my dive. And because I was a crazy so-and-so, all 3 times I fought one of those animals, I chose the 6th round. Nobody had ever gone 7 rounds, and only 2 guys had gone 5, so I chose 6 as my hill to die on, as it were. The first 2 times I fought dogmen, I was in my early 30s and an addict. The final time I was 60, and I'd been clean for 8 years. That time I fought to raise the money to bury my wife, the only woman I ever really cared about. The only person I ever really cared about. That time I was billed as the white-haired wonder, or the fighting Santa Claus. I forget which one they went with. I had long white hair and a beard by then, sure, but I was still in better shape than most of the other fighters there. The odds were that I would drop in the first, and the guy who booked me told me that. He said at my age, I'd be better off taking an early bow, so I didn't have to risk permanent injury. I didn't care, though. I had always lasted 6 rounds before, and I would do my best to last that long again, even in my advanced age. The show promoter was unhappy, but he allowed it to stand. He told me that he was going to put half his money on the 6th round and then place smaller bets on each round up until then. If I hadn't known the guy almost 35 years, he never would have allowed it. But we both knew this would be my last hurrah. I was willing to take the smaller paycheck, because it would be enough to give my wife a tasteful funeral in any case. In that fight, I took a different approach than in any of the previous ones. I was not aggressive right from the start as I would have been when I was younger. I played defense. I measured my opponent. I played rope-a-dope. By the 3rd round, I was still standing, and much of the crowd was booing. I think they'd all bet on me taking a fall in round 1, so they were surly, as the fight just continued, on and on. And then, in the 4th round, the Dogman hit me well below the belt, and I fell backward into my corner, as the ref refused to admit that it had happened. I think he must have bet for me to take an early fall too, because he started counting me out from that low blow, as the bell rang, and my trainer pulled me up off the mat. By then, I was mad. I didn't get mad as often by that age, but this was a special occasion. When that bell rang, I came out seeing red. I punched that Dogman in the head, in the belly, and I kept all my blows legal. That creature had never seen anything like this before, and then before you knew it, I had knocked him back on his doggy behind, laid out on the mat. The ref only got up to a 6 count before that Dogman got up off the canvas. I never saw a dog look so surprised before, I have to say. I really shook him up. Unfortunately, I had emptied my tank in the process, and the Dogman proceeded to pound on me so hard that I didn't make it to the 6th round, but I did make it to the hospital. In fact, I almost wound up in the grave next to my beloved wife, but fate was not to claim me yet. Here I am now, 81 years old, still telling this ancient story. So I don't consider that a bad record. I lost 3 times in a row to the Dogman, but I lasted 6 rounds twice, and 5 in the final one. I am proud of my weird claim to underground fame. After all, not even Muhammad Ali could have made the claim. I knocked down a Dogman at the age of 60.
The war's over, face of deer. It's that hoodie time of year. And you know times are never dull when you've got the hoodie with the scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Hoodie, hoodie, skull. Hoodie, skull. Scary skull. Pull over hoodie. Wear it till spring, it's a goodie. You can buy it without a prescription. Just follow the link in this video's description.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.